You went from being a recreational skier to an Olympic competitor in 4 years. How in the world does somebody do that?
Well, through discomfort. Yeah, it was actually, that's a good question. It's the first question I normally get because who in their right mind
Yeah, who in
decides
their
to
right
go to
mind
the
thinks
Olympic
that?
Games from a standing start, right? And
Did you actually believe that was possible? Obviously you did, but I mean,
yeah, well,
how or why does somebody come to believe that that's possible?
now I'd raced in luge for a couple years and quit. If I had not quit, I would have been a 5-year run to try and make the Olympic team. The buddies that I raced with did not quit, and some of them
Like
made
our
the
friend, our
Olympic.
mutual friend, Ruben Gonzalez, who I've had on the
Well,
podcast.
yeah, Ruben with luge, and but I was racing for would have been racing for the Canadian team, and it was much more competitive to
Sure.
get on that team. But I'll never know. I quit. I had a ticket for the opening ceremonies of the Olympics in Calgary, my hometown where I lived.
Was luge a little too
That
slow for you?
well, yeah. Well, the speed skiing definitely is faster, and
How fast? For the
my
audience,
mom.
tell the audience how fast.
Well, I've gone 135 miles an hour on
That is
skis.
that is absurd. So for
Yeah.
the audience, I want you to just listen to that number and actually so you it's kind of you hear the number, you go, wow, that's fast. But like actually think about how fast that is. Think about sticking your head out the window of a car going 60 miles an hour, or
Yeah, your lips will go blah blah
you're
blah blah
right
blah blah.
at
Blah.
not even half of the speed that you've been. That is, I don't even know if I knew that that was possible for a person to do that. But sorry, go ahead,
Well,
Vince.
Jim, you don't start there. I mean,
Yeah.
you start low and work your way up, as you did with luge. And that answered your question that to what makes you decide to go to the Olympic Games. Often we talk, especially in the motivational speaker world, is what do you want to create or what do you want to build or be a part of. This was not aspirational as much as it was, I never want that feeling of regret again. See, to this day, I'll never know if I could have made the luge team for Canada, but I'll be darned if I ever have that feeling again, that sting of regret. So that's what motivated it.
And so tell us about that journey. How do you go about being a recreational skier and going to an Olympian from Canada in a
Mm-hmm.
sport like speed skiing? You know, we've had Ruben Gonzalez on the podcast, like I mentioned a couple of times now. He was at our my client retreat recently, and he wrote a great
Yeah.
book called The Shortcut. By the way, I recommend that for everybody, as well as, you know, we'll talk about Vince's books as well. But like, so he had his kind of version of getting to the Olympics. Tell us your story, Vince.
The standing start was one where I was aware that the Olympic qualifying standards for Canada is you have to be top 16 or top half in the world, and then you're allowed to be considered to qualify to go to the Olympic Games to represent your country. Because I had no ski race experience, and I knew there were existing ski racers in the world, including Canada, who had the same idea to go to the Olympic Games. It started off a philosophy that ended up being so fundamental to how to get to those Olympic Games and fundamental to sales audiences or leadership groups that I speak to today. And it's do what the competition is not willing to do. And at no time did I ever think, even when I started, that my competition was local at local races or national races or even some international races. My competition were the top 16 racers in the world. And it would be fundamentally impossible to catch up to those people who had that much experience. It would be, they had 20, 25 years of a head start of training. But in a heartbeat, you can do what those top 16 in the world aren't willing to do. So when you make a reference point of who your competition is, think of the highest performers. Think of the people just killing it, people on top of their game, people at the rank 1, 2, 3 in the world. What are they not willing to do? So that was really the mantra, if you will, of every single training decision on how to get there. So you have to cover the basics. You have to be, physically fit, of course. But I split it into 4 categories for what it's worth. It was financial, physical, technical, or research, and then mental. And what financial things would be necessary to get to the Olympic Games? With sponsors, but what could you do in sponsorship that the competition's not willing to do? Physical, what kind of physical training? I went mountain bike racing in the summer, not racing, but just down mountains. and I would pretend that I was relaxing on my way down, not letting go of the handlebars, but if you've ever gone down a mountain on a mountain bike, you just feel like you got this death grip. Well, could you relax and actually take it in? And could you slow time down? A lot of mental training. I was going to the library, researching things. How many athletes are at the library right now? None. They're going to the coach and say, what do I do next? So the mental training was huge. I spent less time physical training, more time mental training, to the tune of 2.2 hours per day on just visualization and imagery. But what's the competition not willing? Well, the library revealed ideas like biofeedback and sensory deprivation float tanks, hypnosis programs, cross-fertilizing hypnosis programs with a sensory deprivation float tank. So there's all sorts of things you could do with the competition's not willing to do. Yeah. So financial, physical, and technical. Sorry, the third one was technical, and that's the research, and then the mental was the fourth.
Yeah. Now, is it true that you strapped yourself to the roof of a car?
Yes, I should send you a picture. I don't know.
I found it online in my research. Can you tell us about this?
Well, there is a backstory there. So I was at the library.
And you were sober, I believe, right? You did this sober.
Well, I was very sober when I was reading this. Not so much when we were doing it, but there was a phone number for the Boeing factory in Seattle. And I called up this phone number, and you hear a guy goes, wind tunnel. I said, hey, can you sneak me in your wind tunnel? That was a dead end. But when you do what the competition's not willing to do, I had a race car buddy, driver buddy, who said, well, I strap you to the top of my car if you want. So we went out to a remote part of Calgary. It was a dead end. So we went all the way to the end, knowing there was no police when we came back. I jumped in now you've got to picture this. It was a pink rubber suit, not hot pink, because it was free. That's why I was wearing a hot pink suit, and got on top of Peter's car, strapped the skis into the roof rack of the car, and then boom, took off down the road. And you learn a ton. I mean, all you have to do is just stick your hand out, like you mentioned earlier, stick your hand out the window of your car, and you can feel what is aerodynamic, and you can feel that pocket where there's just no wind resistance, and you know exactly what that feels like. The second you deviate, you can start to feel wind resistance. And so aerodynamics on top of a car is very, very similar, starting to feel that perfect body position that just everything got quiet. Yeah.
That's incredible. That is a great example of doing what the competition's not willing to do, and figuring out your game, right? Learning something new and finding a way to get the skill and the experience.
There's something when we're recording this, the Paris Olympics haven't happened yet, and there's a motto you're going to hear: Citius, Altius, Fortius, which is swifter, higher, strong. Latin for swifter, higher, stronger. Citius, Altius, Fortius. Well, I created a fourth one, Latin word, which was smartius. How much smarter could you compete, right? How much smarter can you lean into this and compete in a way that's just smarter? And the heroes in sport, business, and life are the ones that work harder, and we even compete with each other. I put in 18 hours today. Oh yeah, I put in 19 and didn't sleep. I slept standing up. We compete about how hard we work, yet it's how smart we show up, how smart we compete, how we do what the competition's not willing to do. It ended up being a massive advantage. Jim, after 2.5 years, one of the techniques I used were gold dots. And on my phone here, you see that gold dot right there? The gold dot was meant to be a trigger for what I called the emotional buzz. And the emotional buzz is a thought that creates a physical reaction. It's literally science that the mind is so massively powered. The mind and body are connected. So if a thought has a physical reaction, there must be some reason that that's resonating. The thought of marching in the opening ceremonies of the Olympic Games made no sense how we started this interview. What makes you decide that you think you could make it? I don't know, but I knew that had an emotional buzz, something about marching in the opening ceremonies. My gold dot because the Olympic qualifying standards were top 16 in the world for Canada, I thought, well, I should probably aim for top 10, because if I aimed for 16 and got a 17th, oops. And then the other part of the gold dot was I am fastest in Canada. Like, I interviewed a guy who had a PhD in the politics and sport at the University of Alberta. Half-hour interview, do what the competition's not willing to do. How many athletes are talking to this dude, right? I said, if there's any advice you could give, what would it be? And he said, well, here's one. Be ranked number one in the nation, because if you're number two or lower, you'll be subject to somebody's agenda. But if you're number one, you write the rules of what's going to work for you in this sport. So this PhD in the politics and sport said this, and so therefore my gold dot was I am the fastest speed skier in Canada and top 10 in the world.
Which doesn't make any sense when you're a recreational skier, but this is tied to your emotional buzz, and this is how you're going to get there.
Right, and it passes that litmus test that this is worth paying attention to. There's something called female intuition. We're both dudes, right? What do you mean it feels right? You know, yeah. But there's a lot of merit in that feeling of some sort of resonance. You know, I'm going to bring up something. It was a book I wrote years ago called The Ant and the Elephant. Yep. And it was inspired by a speech I'd heard by a guy named Dr. Lee Poulos. And Poulos found that in a second of time, your conscious mind is processing with 2,000 neurons, while your subconscious mind is processing with 4 billion neurons. So right now, your conscious mind is processing with 2,000 neurons in a second, and you're watching this podcast, and you're looking at me thinking I look like the old man from Up. I don't know what you're thinking consciously, but that's with 2,000 neurons in a second. It's the subconscious mind activity in that same second. 4 billion neurons in that same second. That's where the resources are. That's where if you set something that is, this is an immutable truth. You'll gravitate towards your dominant thought, and you'll gravitate to that which you believe to be true. So question, are you the architect for your dominant thought? And are you the architect for that which you believe to be true? Or is your dominant thought just showing up? Is your dominant thought just showing up to say, well, that's just, I'm thinking that because that's what it is? Or are you the architect of that dominant? What do you believe to be true? Is that truth just showing up? Or are you the architect of that truth? And that's why these gold dots end up making this it's a trigger with an emotional buzz to establish a dominant thought. And you say something enough times, that's called repetition bias. You say something enough time, it becomes true. So this is just the human condition engineered to work in your favor.
And for the listener, this can be applied to anything in your life. This is whether it's your marriage or you know, losing that 10 pounds or becoming the CEO of the company, like raising the $1 million for your startup idea, whatever it is. Like this can be applied. So if you're not watching on YouTube, if you're listening, you should check this out on YouTube, because Vince is holding up his phone and there's literally a gold dot on the back of it. And so what you're saying, Vince, is you find this thing that creates this emotional buzz. And for you, it was walking in the Olympic, you know, the opening ceremonies and becoming an Olympian. And that you felt that, how important that felt to you, created that emotional buzz for you. And you tethered that thought and feeling to every time you saw that gold dot. Is that right?
Exactly. And if you have any question that this might work, 2 years, 2 and change into my training to try and figure out how to ski race, and then ended up getting invited to the first World Cup of the year at Willamette Pass, placed in that World Cup race. Going into the final, I was in 4th place. Forget my final result, but I remember the second race, World Cup race, because I was top-ranked Canadian, was Ulas, Finland, and I was 8th in that race. And then in the 3rd World Cup of that same year, in top-ranked Canadian still, in that World Cup race in Himalayan, I placed 11th. But the thing is, they released the World Cup points on a piece of paper. And that you see your name 10th in the world in World Cup points, and tell me if that gold dot was a coincidence that I said I'm top 10 in the world, or it's it's true. Like it works. I mean,
Yeah.
so what is that goal dot for you that you've established, that you've engineered, that you're a part of? Or are we just kind of hoping and crossing our fingers that this is going to work out? So there's a lot to be said for engineering this. If we're facing challenging times, and I know, Jim, I know your story a little bit, I'm going, oh, geez. I mean, when you get these massive setbacks, this, what we're talking about, is actually kind of moot, because when you're in a hole, when you're devastated, when you go through an earthquake, personal earthquake, what got you here isn't necessarily going to get you there. So that's actually why I wrote this book over my shoulder, the earthquake. The Ant and the Elephant was a book, very prescriptive in nature. You know, it came out in 2003. I went through a financial crap storm. You know, it was bad, and to climb out of that hole is way different and way harder than climbing a mountain. And that formula that's in the earthquake was very not prescriptive. In fact, the opening line of that book was, "There's no linear way out of chaos."
Hmm.
And so, but there's
Great
still a
line.
relationship between the conscious and subconscious mind, the ant and the elephant, and that's why it also is a parable like the ant and the elephant is.
So how do you, so by the way, so that gold dot, you're putting that in multiple places. It's not just in one place on your phone, or you're putting this in
Oh
different
yeah,
places around your house.
there's one there you can't see. There's one there you can't see.
Yeah.
There's one on that picture frame. There's one in the odometer in my car. There's one in the bathroom in a
Yeah.
mirror. Every time you see the gold dot, you go, "Oh yeah," and you go through that. I'll give you a little tip on how this works. Is when you see the gold dot, just seeing it and going, "I'm fastest in," let's say example, "I'm fastest in Canada, top 10 in the world." Well, okay, what does that mean? Where's the emotional buzz there? If I'm fastest in Canada, top 10 in the world, I'd bring in the five senses of what it looks like, smells like, tastes like make it so much of an experience. There's a term called visualization. Well, I called it experientialization, is to experience the sights, the sounds, the taste, the touch, have a literal experience from seeing the gold dot, that it triggers that experience. And when you have an experience and then you couple that with gratitude or satisfaction or just that sense of accomplishment, that experience is so visceral that the subconscious mind, the elephant, has experienced it. What if you did it a second time, a hundredth time, a thousandth time? That experience has happened 1,000 times. If that experience has happened 1,000 times in your core, not just your imagination, but in your very core, you will gravitate towards that. So that's how that works.
This was a big part of me getting onto the podium at the national championships as a wrestler. It was
Right.
being there, seeing it happen over and over and over. I would drive down the road. I remember driving down the road one time between my junior and senior year in college, because I had never accomplished any meaningful goals in my career, high school or college to that point. And I remember driving down the road in the summer, and I was visualizing, I was feeling this. I would do it anytime I could, right? Anytime, whether I was going to the bathroom or
Every
driving or
time.
going to sleep, whatever. And I
Yeah.
remember like literally crying because I was so grateful and I wanted it so bad, and I was feeling it and experiencing. I was like crying driving down the road. It felt ridiculous. I feel a little ridiculous saying it right now, but like I was feeling the emotion, like I was bringing myself to that moment, and it was happening over and over. And so when the big moment came, the 7 minutes where everything was on the line at the national championships, and I had to wrestle the fourth ranked guy in the country in front of 15,000 people, I had been there. Like there had been this calm, this awareness that like this, this is the thing. This is the thing that I've been seeing, and I had already been there, and it happened. I won the match. So this stuff works. And so Vince, this sounds like the neuroscience of performance. Is this something that you talked about over 2 hours a day that you are dedicating to mindset and sort of this type
Right.
of training? Is that what this
Right.
is? Are we talking about neuroscience and neuro skills here?
Yeah, neuroscience, neuroplasticity is a more recent term, but
Yeah.
I will say this: you'd have to be a head of lettuce to enjoy visualizing something 2.2 hours a day. So that is why the library was a resource for different means to the same end. So
Hmm.
Biofeedback was one thing that I used repeatedly, and it was a galvanic skin response where it would measure stress on your fingertips. And if you could lower the level of stress, then that's a time where you imprint the subconscious mind.
Mm.
Because the way the brain works is there's a part of the brain called the amygdala, and it is triggered by reduced oxygen flow, aka shallow breathing. Example, there's a saber-toothed tiger in the bushes, right? What kind of breathing? Are you relaxed and comfortable? Are you breathing shallow? You kick into fight, flight, or freeze, right? Fight, flight, or freeze have nothing to do with peak performance, have nothing to do with optimum performance in a given situation. But when when stress is managed, there will be stress. When stress is managed, you'll have a more optimum result. So can we condition our body? Of course, you condition through curls, you condition the bench press, you can condition the stress response. That's one. That's listening to that multiple hours a day. The sensory deprivation float tank. Called all these sports psychologists around Calgary. I read about this sensory deprivation float tank. Is there one in Calgary? No, there isn't. You know that saying, I forget the book, maybe The Alchemist, where you say, if you want something bad enough, the universe will conspire to get it for you. And I was driving out of the real estate office because I had to be my own sponsor because I needed money, but I couldn't just have a regular job. So I was pulling out of this office having not sold a house that day. And I drove down the alley, turned left, and there's a woman putting this placard out in front of this new place that she's just reconstructing, and it said float tank. And so it's like it happened in slow motion. I wrote down go, and I said, is this a sensory deprivation float tank? And she said, yeah, it's the first one in the city. And I said, how would you like some PR? Right. And so I called up my resources at the Calgary Herald, and I said, I'm using a sensory deprivation float tank as mental training to get to the Olympic Games. She gave me 3, 4, 5 hours per week of access to this thing. Another story. Went to the library because I was trying to do mental training for ski racing, and there was an audio hypnosis album called Skiing with the Wind. It was actually an audio cassette at the time. Listened to it, but the script wasn't right. So I thought, well, do what the competition's not willing to do. I rewrote the script, made it specific to speed skiing, took it to my dad, who was a radio TV broadcaster. He goes, Vince, you're crazy. Stop this. So I took it to my mom, and I said, Mom, would you read this? And she said, up for speed skiing. She goes, is it safe? And I went, what's safer than luge? So I had my mom's voice on an audio hypnosis album called Skiing with the Wind, specific to speed skiing, which is straight down the side of the mountain, 0 to 60 miles an hour in 3 seconds, 125 miles an hour in 8 seconds, no turns. There's a speed trap at the bottom, the length of a football field. It takes you a second and a half to cross that distance. And to have an audio hypnosis album specific to speed skiing with my mom's voice. And then the sensory deprivation float tank gal says, I just installed underwater speakers. Perfect. So I took my sensory deprivation float tank sessions and overlaid that with an audio hypnosis album with my mom's voice specific to speed skiing. When you do what the competition's not willing to do, you create this domino effect that you could explain to your competition what you're doing, and they would go, what? Because when you lean into this, the solutions become so evident and so powerful, and filling up that 2.2 hours a week and added meditation and just hypnosis. I got everything. You name it. It was filling up that time as much as possible, and more mental training and less physical training, which is what the competition wasn't willing to do. So it worked. Ranked top 10 in the world after 2.5 years. So the gold dot ended up changing a year prior to the Olympic Games. I'm the fastest speed skier in the world and the Olympic champion. How's that one? That had an emotional buzz, standing on the highest podium, listening to your national anthem, feeling the weight of a new medal around your neck, biting it, that taste, touch, that sounds, whatever. And so a year leading to the Olympic Games, that was the gold dot. And I'll give you a little insight here. In my keynote speeches, I don't tell the audience what the end result from that gold medal run of the Olympic Games was. Yes, ranked top 10. Yes, going into the gold medal run. Yes, the guy before me misses the world record, but 0.2 miles an hour. I've been going 2.5 kilometers an hour faster than him. You save your best for last. I'm not just going to break the world record. I'm going to annihilate it. And what color medal are you taking home when you annihilate a world record? Yet I hit a bump and show the video. And the audience watches this in this video is real time. But isn't that life, right? We all hit bumps.
Yeah.
We all hit these bumps in life.
Right.
We how many times in your life have you won, right? Just maybe a handful. But in your life, how many times have you not reached your goal or whatever? Hundreds.
Right.
We're not defined by the bumps we hit. We're not defined by the goals we reach.
But that's only true if you're willing to dream big, aim high, set the goal. Because I think a lot of people are afraid to say, I'm number one in the world. I'm the Olympic gold medalist. Because, well, wait, what if I'm not? Then whatever. So you weren't, right? But you were close. You had everything lined up. You was as close as you could possibly get to doing that because you had that vision, right? I mean, because you had the courage to actually believe something that was, to be honest, a little absurd. Recreational skier to, Olympic gold medalist.
Yeah, I'm 100% on board with that. I'm also going to add that I'm now a dad. Well, I've been a dad for 27 years. And there's one thing I've taught my kids, just one. And if you asked them, they would say, well, what advice would your dad give? And it's never make a decision based on fear. Mm-hmm. And so if the decision is, well, what if I get hurt? Or what if I feel bad? Or what if what if I'm not safe? I mean, well, then mitigate the fear, mitigate the safety, mitigate the opportunity to get hurt. I mean, so that there's more safety, minimize the risk and optimize the opportunity. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to rationalize everything. But if people listening to this, if you don't make a decision based on fear, just never make a decision based on fear. And we can truly shock ourselves with the outcomes that end up happening.
In talking about outcomes that end up happening, you are not only an Olympian, were one of the best in the world at what you did. You were also a New York Times bestselling author. You were also a Hall of Fame speaker. You've led Himalayan expeditions. What makes you different? I mean, have you used just what we've been talking about for all of those, or have there been other things? No. I mean, what makes Vince different? Like any one of those let me put it back. Highlight of anyone's life. Right.
Well, a couple of things come to mind. Number one is when I was 21 years old, ran into the Australian national parachute champion, and he convinced me to come down to Canberra and skydive. The second jump, now this is a static line. There's no tandem jumps. You're on your own. The static line deploys the chute. The second jump, the chute did not open. And going towards the earth, I mean, the chute was out, but it was wrapped in the ropes.
Oh.
But I remembered the emergency procedures that he had taught earlier that day there's a yellow ring. You take your thumb through the yellow ring. You extend your left arm. You deploy the main chute. You're back into free fall. Take your right hand, extend that cable, and it deploys the reserve chute. And in this case, it worked quite well. At that moment, I realized that I could handle any kind of from the days following. You think about something, maybe it was a car wreck or some significant activity, and I realized I could handle any kind of pressure. Right? It was just evidence. So I had that advantage. A few months later, I paid $5 for a fortune teller to look at my left palm, and with these kind of foggy eyes, this old Asian guy, he looked at me kind of, I don't know what he saw, but he said, "What do you want to hear?" And I went, "Well, what do you see?" And he looks and he goes, "Well, it looks like you don't make it past 40. And I went, "Oh, so I have a deadline." Wow. Right? So between that and the deadline, what makes a person go for that experience, those experiences led to the Olympic experience. And then there's one more. A friend in high school had passed away. I was 16. She was 17 or so. Her name is Jill Kudrick. And all of us went, she had heart failure and it was incredibly sad. She would light up a room. It was May. She died on a Monday from heart failure. On Friday, we're at the funeral. And it's a lesson that defining moments of emotional intensity equals defining moments, reveal decisions that we will make at that time. And some decisions work for us, and some of them are so fundamentally much of an inflection point that I made a decision to try everything at least once, do everything at least once, as long as it was moral, ethical, and legal. And to have Jill's death create that impetus, that inflection point to try everything at least once. That's why I tried luge, and that's why I tried speed skiing. And I'll add fourth one to answer your question in the longest version possible. It's called the asshole theory. And the asshole theory is that a buddy of mine, I had crashed in a speed skiing race and I was shaking. Like I qualified on my butt through the finish line and qualified for the next round. And so I was now on my second set of skis, not my best skis, because my best skis were destroyed from this crash at 100 plus miles an hour, nervous. And his name is Laurent Marichal. And Laurent pulled me aside and he could tell I was nervous and said, Vince, you got this. And I said, yeah, sure. He says, no, you got this. Look, do you know what the asshole theory is? I said, no. He points at a guy that's on the track, just about to go. You see that asshole over there? Yeah. If that asshole can do it, so can you.
Love it.
And then it was like, all right, okay, got it. So how did the New York Times best-selling book happen? All those four things. How did the Speaker Hall of Fame thing happen with Zig Ziglar, Og Mandino, Jim Rohn? I was one of the youngest inductees at the time. How did that happen? I didn't do it on purpose, but I did have a new gold dot after the Olympics. I'm the top 10 speakers in the world.
Wow.
Right? There's no rating, as you know, speakers. There aren't. But had an emotional buzz to it. And all of a sudden I'm marching on stage with accepting the award for the Hall of Fame for speakers in my late 30s. I mean, this curiosity that we all have, we're all curious at a very deep, deep level. If we lean into that curiosity, stuff shows up. And if you're not making any decision based on fear, the stuff that shows up means that you're going to use the mathematics of opportunity, means you're going to open a door and go, oh, there's two more doors. Why don't I open that door? And so that all plays out. Who knows what's next? I don't know, but I know something's waiting out there, and I'm just opening doors.
For the listener, I think this is like one of those episodes you got to listen to a second time, and you've got to do something.
Might be too much
information. This is gold, no pun intended, obviously, with the gold dot, but this is fascinating, Vince. For the listener who's bought into what you're saying, first of all, can you recommend, let's say one or two of your books? I know you've written quite a few books. What would be one or two of your books you would recommend?
Well, the New York Times bestseller that I wrote is called The Age of Speed, but it was more of a concept book for the time because I refer to the BlackBerry as the Crackberry and all that. So let me pick out the two I've mentioned already, The Ant and the Elephant, which is prescriptive, aspirational in nature, really understanding how the conscious and subconscious mind works. And then absolutely make your second book The Earthquake, because the earthquake is, we all suffer some sort of setbacks. Some of us those are massive. Somebody listening lost their job or lost a child or went bankrupt or some sort of devastation that rocks us to the core and we don't know how to get our footing. That is the book I wrote for. In fact, I wrote it and it's perfect for veterans because veterans have left the military. Their life was laid out for them. They're what they had to do and accomplish. And now it's just feeling like one of those things in the outside of the car wash or the, you know, the automotive sales where it's just flopping around. It
Yeah.
it can
Right.
feel so untethered, you know. So anyway,
Yeah.
I would say the ant and the elephant and the earthquake would be a good. If they go to my website, I see all book orders, and I'll sign the book for them if they want.
Oh,
They want
very
a
cool.
copy.
Excellent. Excellent. And we'll have Vince's, and it's just vinceposcente.com if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah,
And that's
vincepostente.com. We'll get you there.
POSCENTE.com. So you can buy the books there. Vince, for the listener who's bought in and wants to take an action item away from this, what's one thing that they can do in the next, say, 24 to 48 hours to take action outside of buying a book or books? What's one action item they can do right now?
Here's one. Make a list of, without thinking, just list of all the things you'd like to accomplish, right? And you know, everything from, let's say, run a marathon to create a business to whatever, and make a list. Make sure there's at least 25 items on there, and don't edit. Just write it down, even if it seems ridiculous. Pick out the one that scares you the most and open the door behind that one. Poke at that one. Look at that one that scares you the most. And I promise you, on the other side of that is a sense of satisfaction and accomplishment and curiosity. That itch has been scratched. There is something waiting for you to circle, but don't think about what you'd circle. Like, you can't edit. You just write 25 down.
No thinking.
And then, yeah, I'd do that.
Wow. All right. We've got our marching orders. Everybody listening, you know what to do next. Vince, thank you so much for making time to come on the show.
Jim, thanks for bringing me on. When I got the email, I was like so excited. Ruben had said, "Would you be interested?" And I said, "Hell yeah, that sounds perfect." So, yeah, you're doing great work. I've listened to what you got. Yeah, it's just awesome. So keep it up.
Well, great to connect with you, Vince. Talk to you soon.